Hello, friends and listeners, and welcome to Get a Cat, Get a Horse.
The gosh darn best nerd culture podcast around.
I'm Will,
And I'm a Manny.
and today is episode 18, Adapting Comic Books to Screen and Film. Wait, screen and film might be the same
Exciting.
thing.
It is the same
It's
thing, but
adapting,
the iteration is
adapting
good.
comic books. So today we're going to talk about different ways that have been employed or deployed to create comic book adaptations for television shows and movies, and ways that we think they have worked and not worked so much. So, Amani, why don't you take it away for us and bring us your insights on this recent age of comic book television that we've been experiencing?
Yeah. So, just so the listeners know, I kind of took the role of the TV side a little bit and sort of did a little bit of research. I just looked at a lot of lists, really, of comic book adaptations to the screen. And I have a massively messy and unorganized list of TV shows in front of me. I'm just
I
going
like
to
it.
kind of look through and talk about. So I think what's interesting about this topic is that, as everybody knows, I'm sure recently, like, we have seen sort of a heyday of comic book adaptations to the screen, big and small. I think that in a lot of ways we are lucky to live in an era of filmmaking where, like, creators feel like they can adapt some of these more visually challenging subjects to film. But, like, I think the flip side of that is, like, we are seeing an era of, like, oh, we just need to remake content. That's what people want. So it's sort of bittersweet. I think when I think of really, like, legitimately good, like, just great, like basic, like, good comic adaptations, I think of 90s cartoons. Will, are you a fan of the 90s cartoon? Is this something that
I
you have
watched
familiarity
them.
with?
Yeah, I would call myself familiar, but maybe not a fan. Like, in the sense that I watched them when I was growing up, and probably like up until, I don't know, like, I don't even know like when exactly the time period was, but I would guess probably until I was like 13 or 14 I would watch them. I don't know. Like, I remember watching Batman Beyond, I remember watching the Batman animated series, the Superman animated series, some of the Justice League stuff, but I did not get into, I know a couple people that I work with are into like some of the newer stuff, like Young Justice and some of like the
Yeah.
Ultimate Spider-Man stuff. And I have
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
experienced that as much. I would say like I am more into like I guess if you could call it classic, but like the classic DC animation stuff. Like, I remember when what was it, Mask of the Phantasm came out. Like, I remember that being like a big deal, and like, I mean, that must have been like what,
I
like
remember
98
that
or
too.
99 or something. Like something like that, where like, yeah, where I did think that the Batman cartoons and the Superman cartoons, the Justice League stuff was like, I think even back then, as somebody who wasn't like really into comic books or really into nerd culture, I kind of knew that there was something special going on there. And I think like
Yeah.
just the creative talent on those, and the kind of like the seriousness that they did it for kids, you know, like a show that was ostensibly for kids but was not lowered in any way, like, and is still watchable by, you know, us today or whatever. Like, I think I recognized it being great then, but I can't say that like I haven't gone back within the last 5 years and rewatched them all or anything like that. I know my brother is really into them, and he's told me about
Yeah.
like Justice League Unlimited and stuff being one of his favorites. But yeah, I'm familiar but not caught up recently, I'd say.
Yeah, I definitely think, at least in my experience with comics to screen adaptations, like that era, all of the shows you just mentioned, Justice League Unlimited, Batman, Batman Beyond, were like
I
the
really liked Batman
start
Beyond
of,
back in the
like,
day. That was my shit.
yeah, yeah. I know it didn't technically come from like a comic. The comics of it came
Yeah, I
after,
don't know.
but
Did
I
it, or
group it all
yeah?
together just
I don't
because I
actually
feel
know on
like
that one.
spiritually it kind of did what it needed to do
Oh
for
yeah,
comic book
for sure,
lovers,
for sure.
you know.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I was like religious about watching those shows. Like those shows, especially like Batman and Batman Beyond, were like my shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's fair to say that a lot of comic book shows for kids. A lot of animated comic book shows have come and gone. And there's probably a much smaller list. People have a much smaller list of things that they actually remember, and actually want to talk about. And those are the shows for me that really kind of stood out. And I think you're right. I think what makes those really special is that they didn't sort of dumb down these more serious topics, right? Like they are for kids, but they still like the philosophical questions that they're posing still hold up. So you can go back, and I've rewatched all of JLU, Justice League Unlimited, and I mean, I still think it's one of the best animated shows I've ever seen, and you definitely need to watch it.
They also have like a really clean, classic animation style. Like the guy behind most of them, Bruce Timm, I think like his stuff
Bruce
is
Timm really, he really for
good.
a generation defined what a superhero looked like. You know, like.
I mean, like my Batman,
like
as silly as it is, like a lot of people talk about their Batman being like Christian Bale or whatever. Like my Batman is like Kevin Conroy, and that's like absolutely what I think of when I think of like Batman and Joker.
Same.
In my head, it's Kevin Conroy's voice as Batman, and then Mark Hamill doing his Joker thing. So like, you know,
totally
it's funny because like I guess when we were younger, around that time, it would have been kind of like the George Clooney, Val Kilmer Batman era. Like those would have been coming out relatively. Sort of similar in like the mid to early 90s, but like I don't associate those with Batman at all. I'm just kind of like, oh, those are like goofy offshoots. Like my Batman is the animated series Batman, which is weird. I've never thought about that until now. But like, if I had to pick a Batman that I most associate with, like that's definitely the one that resonates with me.
That's funny. I've never thought about it too, but I would be exactly the same. I don't think those like those Val Kilmer, George Clooney movies never really land in any way. Like I think going back and watching them now, I'm sure we're going to talk about them when we talk about film, but like they're interesting and they're like fun, but they're not. There's nothing in them that really gets you in the gut, you know? And like, sticks there. Yeah. So, I agree. Okay, so moving on from like nostalgia shows, which you should all go watch. I want to talk a little bit more about like the field as we see it now. Like all of this, we have so much going on right now when it comes to comic books being adapted into TV shows. Like the list is endless, really. There's the Netflix universe, Daredevil, Punisher, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and the Defenders. There is sort of the horror genre, Preacher, Walking Dead, Outcast. There is the Marvel TV universe, which is basically Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Lucifer maybe could fit into that. And then I think Cloak and Dagger is being adapted for
Lucifer
the
is
next
DC
season. Oh, is Lucifer DC? My mistake. Well, DC is then getting real big because they got Supergirl, Arrow, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Gotham, and the Dark Avengers is apparently coming to CW with the original Constantine, that actor who from the show that only lasted maybe how many episodes was it? It was only one season. Really sad. And then there's all kinds of stuff, like Powers, Riverdale is going to be.
Oh yeah.
And then there's so many huge adaptations. Why the Last Man, Scalped, Briggs Land, The Fifth Beatle, and Essex County are all slated.
Are they really?
Like maybe not slated, but they're all in production. Like there are so many shows in production right now that have a really good chance of being made just because studios are seeing the money that can be made in this genre. Also, sort of not really in anything else is like Winona Earp and Dark Matter on the Sci-Fi Channel. Those are adaptations from comics. So,
Winona Earp is an interesting one because I'm pretty sure it was launched side by side with a comic. Like I think it was new comic and a TV show at the same time.
What's happening with Outcast too?
Outcast is like probably 10 or 12 issues in. Like, but I think like Winona Earp, like literally the first issue came out on like the week that the TV show debuted.
Well, maybe that's why it's so good.
Is it good?
No. I only watched the first
I was supposed to say I didn't think it looked very good.
Maybe I need to give it more chance.
I don't know.
Okay, so we have this huge sort of grocery store of level options of TV shows right now. At least when it comes, if you want to watch a comic book adaptation on the small screen, let me tell you, you can. And you can for probably the rest of your life.
Thank you for giving me permission.
Welcome. You're welcome. I was just sort of whatever. Basically, we are spoiled for choices, and out of the landscape right now, I want to kind of get your opinion on what do you think of the quality of what we're kind of getting in terms of what you've seen and what you've heard, and your personal interest and what you're willing to spend your time on and check out, because there's so much stuff. It's, you could almost argue that, oh, I didn't even mention there's a new generation of kids comic book adaptations. Young Justice, as you mentioned, and Ultimate Spider-Man are two of the better ones, but there's a ton of stuff coming out right now that I have not bothered researching. But isn't there like an Avengers and some
There's a lot.
then,
There's a ton of stuff.
yeah, not to mention all of the made-for-TV movies from DC and Marvel, respectively.
Yeah, I did want to kind of talk about that.
10 years.
I mean, honestly,
well,
now that
I'll
we've
let you
listed all
handle
this
that.
stuff out, I feel like this episode might even be served better just sticking in the TV realm, because I think there's going to be enough to talk about in this like sort
Okay.
of thing, and then separating it out. So, yeah, I think I've seen some of these. I've seen, like we said, most of the animated stuff, and I've seen a chunk of The Walking Dead. I have not jumped on Preacher, because I have not read the comic book yet, but from everything that I have heard from people, it's quite different in its actual, like, I mean, even you were telling me that it's quite different, and that like you could read them, parallel and still be satisfied with both of them without feeling that either one is kind of like spoiling or like sort of one-upping the other, I guess. My thing with The Walking Dead, I would say like that's kind of my fear of superhero or of comic book adaptations, because I think it actually like follows the comic book formula a little bit too well. And what I mean by that is I tend to like comic books that are contained and that have like an actual story, and the story has an end, to me, like something that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And like that's just the way I've been with my comic book runs too. Like I tend to gravitate more towards either creator-owned stuff, like we've talked about Planetary in the past, and you've talked about East of West, or like Stray Bullets, or all these kind of series that kind of have like some set number of issues or some set ending in mind. And right now, The Walking Dead in the comics is on like, I don't know, I would guess issue like 140 or something like that. It's way up there. It's one of the longer running comics going on. And Robert Kirkman has said in interviews that he just wants, like, if he had his way, like, he would just write it forever. Like, he would just keep on writing The Walking Dead forever. And I mean, like, there's something fun about that. Oh yeah,
I want to echo that. Like, I definitely feel like I like to call it Lost syndrome, like the JJ.
Yeah,
Lost
no, it's
syndrome,
very accurate. Yeah.
where people are just enthralled with what they're making, and they keep revisiting the same emotional arcs over and over again. And that's what that's what really kind of annoys me about Walking Dead, because I think that especially the first 2, probably to 3 seasons really land emotionally, and then they keep revisiting the same kind of things.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now you're just, for lack of a better word, fucking with me, right? Like,
yeah, no, it is.
Trying to tell new stories anymore. Like, I just keep falling into this emotional trap. And I think that's kind of cheap storytelling, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. That's sort of exactly what I was getting towards, is that like my basic fear with these is that they would turn into that. Is that they would become that thing where basically like, because one of the problems with jumping on Batman or Daredevil or whatever is that when you look at it and there's 600 issues of it, you kind of need to pick out these like certain runs, and talk about like which artist you want to read from and which like writer you want to read from. And with something like The Walking Dead, where like it sort of feels like a soap opera to me at this point, like where it just keeps going on and on and on, and like you said, it just kind of builds through the same emotional arcs and through the same kind of like twists and stuff. And granted, people will talk about like, oh, season 4 wasn't great, but season 6 was great, or like, I'm sure there will be high points and low points in the quality. My point is that like in general, I am somebody who's a proponent of having some set and defined arc and idea of what you want to do with your creation, and not just like, keep on producing the same stuff because people are demanding it. Like they have The Walking Dead, and then they have Fear the Walking Dead, the kind of like spin-off kind of thing. And like, I don't know, it just feels like they could do anything with that show, and that's kind of what makes it a little bit not interesting to me. Like, it sort of feels like it's lost some of the stakes or the rules that it originally started with, because if you can just go on and like keep spiraling it out into infinity, then like I'm just not that interested. So like my
Yeah.
my my plea or my like hope for something like Preacher, and I think this will be the case, is that it, because Preacher is based on a finished comic book series. I hope that they have an ending in mind and a goal in mind, and that they get there. And whether or not it follows the comic book closely, I don't really care that much. I just want things to have purpose in their construction and in the direction that they're going. Because, like you said, the loss syndrome is like a very real thing where you get people 5 issues in, and then you just totally fuck the landing, and it just doesn't like make sense in the end because you just kept on writing stuff that was convenient to fit in, but like wasn't good storytelling. Yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
my feeling on that, on like the general comic book thing, is that don't become like comic books TV series. Don't go down that rabbit hole of just being like monthly serialized stuff that has no end, because those aren't
Yeah.
the kind of comic books that I'm like super into. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that's fair. I think also that Walking Dead is kind of an interesting and sort of unique kind of a situation, just because the creator is like the head writer, and he's
Yeah,
also
that is
writing
a
the
tough
book. Like
thing. Yeah.
he's kind of in a weird spot. I would argue that he doesn't really. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of distance from his work anymore. He's very
No.
talented,
And that's the
but
thing that he's
he's
doing
sort
with
of in it.
Invincible too. And like I love Invincible, and it's a really fun, superhero story. It's really awesome from Image as well. And it's about, I would say, also about 120 something issues in. And I think you're right. I think he's lost. I think it's kind of like blurred the lines between, I don't know how to say it. Like it's kind of blurred the lines between creator and creation, where like he is just the thing now. Like Robert Kirkman
Yeah.
is just writing nonstop all of these things and like living in that world and loving it. And like he can take you on lots of different arcs and like tell a lot of cool fun stories, but yeah, I don't know. There's something to be said about him being so all controlling with all of it, and just like how many people can you bring along for that ride in the end? Because
I want to see
it's
people
just such a
stick the
long thing.
landing,
Yeah, exactly.
storytelling
I'm
wise. Like
more interested in that.
I want to see how you get me to the end, right? Like
Yeah.
I think you could probably argue that ending something is the hardest part about telling a story. Like,
I would think
and if
so.
you're not, and it's a lot easier to sort of set up interesting worlds and set up interesting characters and sort of have them meander through on, at infinite, forever, and but maybe the whole point of something is to see how it all ends. I don't know. That's a different discussion. I think one worth having. Maybe we should write that idea down. Endings.
Yeah, that is an interesting discussion.
We should.
But
We should
I think
make
that's
a
part
note.
of why the Marvel Netflix stuff has appealed to me, is that there is kind of a definitive, 8 issues, 10 issues, or issues, eight episodes, 10 episode kind of thing, where like I am somebody who's much more into that like mini series
Yeah.
mentality, and kind of having like a complete arc done in that one, series, or in that one season, I guess. So
Yeah.
I also like, I wonder how tight Netflix is going to be about that, though, because we just got an announcement for the third season of Daredevil, as well as the Defenders and stuff. So I'm wondering, like, do you think that they're going to spiral out of control with that stuff? Like now that Punisher's getting a spinoff and we're getting
Um.
all these announcements, like, do you think that's going to be a good model going forward, or are they just going to go crazy with it?
I don't know. I think that it's very possible that they could. I think sort of a test run for the Netflix series, or this idea of a Netflix universe would be the DC universe with Arrow and Flash,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
now
yeah.
Supergirl and Legends of Tomorrow, and even possibly Dark Avengers coming into that. I think you look at the first maybe 2 seasons of Arrow, and whatever you're going to think about a CW production, like they have a very specific style and a very specific tone that they're going for, which is, works for me. In some cases, not always. But I think the first couple of seasons of Arrow are a lot stronger than these last couple, just because I think they're kind of descending into this melodramatic sort of like space where they have all these characters that people love, and they just keep throwing them together and pulling them apart now, not just romantically, but just like in conflict, like Oliver and and his best friend, oh man, I'm blanking on his name, Diggle, I think is his name,
I
have
don't know.
been
I haven't
in
seen
love
him.
with each other and fighting for the last like 2 seasons, and it's just sort of getting old, you know. Like they need to figure out something to inject into that series, and I could easily see the Daredevil Punisher conversation becoming
Turning
just
into
this
that,
thing that they
yeah.
just talk about. You know, and every couple episodes they're like, well, I don't want to kill people. Well, I do. Oh, okay, I guess we're at an impasse again. And it kind of leeches the whole point of that, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas those 4 episodes from season 2 were some of the best the filmmaking I've seen out of TV in a long time, at least in my opinion, and screenwriting, everything. And we're kind of the icing on the cake. Like, we're just the best part of that show for me, you know? And I could easily see them revisiting that like over and over and over again,
Yeah.
like never really letting it go. I don't know. I'm curious to see how it turns out, because part of me is like, no, I like Daredevil. I think there's still stuff to say with him, and I want to see that. And season 2 was good enough that I'm like jazzed about season 3. But
Mhm.
you're right. Like, maybe with a character like Luke Cage, who was maybe a little bit thinner, or even Jessica Jones, who the show I didn't quite enjoy as much. Like, I could see getting myself like tired out on that sort of, I don't know, thing that they have to say with them. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think my worry with them is that I totally agree. I totally agree with what you're saying. That like if they don't find ways to move beyond kind of the way that Punisher and Daredevil interact, it can. I think it will be very tiring, because I think I got about as much as I could get out of the I kill people. Well, I don't kill people. I think I got as much as I need of that out of out of season 2 of Daredevil. My worry with them is that they are like, I'm just wondering if, and I don't know about Arrow. I don't know about the CW universe as much, but one thing that worries me about both the Netflix series and the CW universe is the possibility for them to descend into crossover madness, which I think is where like comic
Yeah.
books are today. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a couple months ago, we were talking about DC Rebirth, and I was critical of it, but I would like to amend a little bit of what I said, because looking back, although I do think a lot of the criticisms I had were valid, at least they have a direction and like an idea and a unified front. Because one thing that's happening right now with Marvel and the comic books is like they are just doing crossover after crossover after crossover, and it's confusing, like bordering on the nonsensical, and the creative teams change up so often, and like I worry about that for TV following that formula, because it's one thing when you have like The Walking Dead and it's just a standalone show, or you have Preacher and it's just a standalone show, like there's not a universe. But when you have like a CW universe, or you have a Netflix universe, and you have like in Netflix the possibility of 5, concurrent shows going on, as well as crossover things, I just worry that like you don't end up spending any time. Like I feel like we're never going to get a Daredevil season 1 again. Does that make sense? Like that was
We're not.
so that
We're
was
not.
so good and so tight and so character focused and like so incredible in what it was doing. And it's just like when you open up the door to 20 different characters and the need to satisfy, all of their plot lines, and the need to set them all up into a specific place to get ready for the next Defenders season, where they all cross over, like that is a way to lose me very quickly. I guess like I'm worried about that. Like I want to see these things maintain some sense of individual integrity in the way that they are constructed, and to not just dissolve into like this blur of crazy goofiness, because I feel like that is some
Yeah.
of what you were talking about with the CW. Some of the frustrations with that is that like as you get the Flash and Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow all talking together and everybody's appearing in each other's shows, they start to lose any form of identity, and it just starts to become like this big bleh. And like I feel like that's what's happening to Marvel in the comics right now, is that like there's not a lot of identity in the stories. There's a couple that are really good, but there's a lot of just kind of like mushing of like the general idea of Marvel, and you'll know kind of what you'll get from any of them, but you don't know what you're going to get individually in terms of their strengths. Does that make sense?
This actually
That would
leads
be my
me,
worry.
yeah. No, it does. It does. And this actually leads me into kind of 2 points that I wanted to make.
Go for it.
Let's start with the first one, obviously, one at a time. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of like source material, right? And where is that sweet spot for people drawing appropriately from the comics themselves while still making original and exciting stuff, right?
Yeah.
Historically, the US version of comics to screen doesn't, just remake shot for shot what was in the comic, maybe in the way that anime to like manga to anime would.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shows out right now. There's a lot of shows being made, and they all sort of fall in a different place on the spectrum of, oh, this is how much we're going to take from the source material. This is how much we're going to add in sort of our own flair. What is for you that sweet spot? Where does that sort of land for you?
That's a tough question. I don't know. Because, I mean, like, there are certain things, like, for example, one of the better moments I thought in Daredevil season 2 was, the scene when Punisher has Daredevil knocked out, and then he has the revolver like duct taped into his hand.
Yeah.
And he's gonna kill. And
it's
so
not
when
from
it is direct, and I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that when I read it. But that is directly from a Punisher story that Garth Ennis wrote. And so like.
Yeah.
When I watched it, I had not read that story yet. So to me, I was just like, oh, this is really cool. Like, that's a really interesting idea. And then I sort of saw the adaptation and I was like, oh, okay. Like, I see what you did there. And it made good use of it. I think like my worry about it is stuff with like Elektra and stuff where like, they tried to, in season 2, for example, I'm just going to talk about Daredevil again. Because in season 2, for example, when they brought in Elektra and the Hand and the ninjas and stuff, I think they were trying in a large part to kind of get that Frank Miller thing going, where like that's what Frank Miller's run was about in the 70s, like bringing that kind of like mysticism to it. And I don't think it made sense for the show. So like I think that it's fine to use adaptations and even like to stick very close to them, but I think you need to like understand that the Daredevil that you're creating for Netflix should have his own personality and be his
Flavor.
own thing. Yeah. So like there's literally 50 years of Daredevil stories out there, and in some of them, Matt Murdock behaves in ways that he would never in others. Like it's so wildly varied in his behavior and what it's focused on. And I guess like my hesitation with Daredevil is that it seems like maybe season 1 they kind of did a focus on like more of a Bendis kind of thing, like this newer kind of darker thing. And then season 2 they're going into like Frank Miller. And I would rather have them like cherry pick ideas that make sense for their own Netflix Daredevil and just like define him as a different character rather than trying to live up to any particular ideas about it. I feel like that's that would be my feeling in general, is that like I don't want you to try to like, if it's whether it's a Batman movie or a Daredevil movie or a Constantine thing or whatever, I don't want you to try to live up to like everybody's idea of what this thing is. Just define him on your own. Like, you define the character in your own terms, and then make sure that like the things that you do ring true with that character. Just because, like, especially with Daredevil, I felt like some of the motivations with Elektra and the Hand, like if you didn't know kind of the Frank Miller background with that and like how obsessed he is with Elektra in the comics, like it just didn't make sense, and it was kind of poor storytelling. So like I just. Like, it's fine to look at the comics for ideas, but I don't think that they should be the guidebook. I think, like, writers for TV should write their own guidebook and then use comics for inspiration instead of, like, trying to shoehorn in, into the comic book. Is that close to what you're thinking?
I don't know if I agree with that fully. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think in some cases it's like a case-by-case basis, which makes that sort of like a non-answer. But I think what you're talking about is sort of illustrated perfectly in, like, the original Justice League cartoon from the 90s. Do you know the format of that show?
I don't remember. You'll have to refresh my memory on it.
Basically, it will take maybe 2 or 3 sort of normal episode lengths and tell like maybe a larger story from the DC universe. So it has like it deals with Flashpoint, and it deals with like the attack of all of Hawkgirl's people, right? The
Mhm.
Thanagarians, which is like
Yeah,
sort of
I
a
was
big deal in
sort
the
of aware of that.
comics.
So it's like mini
Yeah,
arcs that each touch on like
exactly.
big
It's like
stories.
it's
Yeah.
basically like a bunch of mini series, like all together in like
Hmm.
2 seasons. So you'll,
That's
in the
awesome.
span of one season, you'll get maybe like 6 big things from DC history
Yeah,
told through
yeah.
the lens. And what you're saying about like the show has a very specific style, right? Like it's for kids. It has a certain visual thing. Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Arrow, Green Lantern and Hawk Girl are all very specifically defined as characters at the beginning, so they maybe don't do exactly what they would have done in the comics themselves,
Uh-huh.
but they respond to these big DC events in like authentic and consistent ways that makes it really really easy to get invested in them. And then each couple of weeks there's like a big thing that happens in the world to them and they have to like go deal with it, right? So
Yeah.
what you're talking about, like consistent characters that deal with really cool things from the comics. So like, maybe newer viewers who, like me, who have no idea where they're pulling any of this from, can still really enjoy and really appreciate these stories. But then, like, historically, people who have history with comics and who know where this all is coming from still feel, like, really satisfied. So, like,
Yeah, and I feel
maybe
like
that's
there
not
can be
this.
a oh, go for it.
Sorry, I just want to go. I just want to say, like, I think that's one way of doing it. I think
Uh-huh.
I think Preacher, the more recent Preacher, is a good example of a completely new way to interpret stuff to the screen. I think Seth Rogen and company have been really smart about understanding what it was about that show, that comic book series that people really loved, which was the characters,
Hmm.
and have really successfully sort of taken their own spin on that. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. What were you gonna?
No, I was gonna say that exact thing. Like, I think probably for me the ideal balance would be, like, I've already read, or if I haven't read, I have the ability to read anything that's been written in comic book form. And if you're going to adapt something, like, why not try something new? I guess like I don't find as much value in adapting a story that's already been done because that story exists. And like I think so Preacher kind of I think has an interesting way of doing it because like you said it is for all intents and purposes, it walks that line really well of like being a new story. So if you've read the series, you can still get something out of it, but also having the fan kind of service and like callbacks and stuff. So like that's like a
Yeah.
really nice mix of things where it's like you can take these things and go off on a different direction and tell a new story that's more interesting than just adapting something from page to screen. But at the same time, like if you've read the comic books, maybe you'll get a little something extra out of it. Like there'll be little references or calls and stuff. And it's kind of like that with Game of Thrones, which is not a comic book, obviously, but for so long it mirrored what was going on in the books, and there was sort of like I think a certain like satisfaction of people who had read the books sitting and watching it with people that hadn't read the books and kind of knowing what was coming next and being like, oh my god, it's gonna blow your mind. But like now 60 seasons in or whatever, they're kind of pushing into a territory where nobody knows, and for me I think that's more exciting. Like I would rather be in kind of a territory where like nobody really knows what's going to happen. You can kind of guess, and they have characters and ideas pulled from the source material, but it's not like you can sit there and be like, oh, next up Jesse's going to say this, and then he says it. Like it's a little bit.
Yeah.
I just would. I would like more creative freedom in the adaptations, and I think I haven't seen Preacher, but from what you've said, like it does follow down that path that I would appreciate more.
Yeah, I think you'd be into it. I think especially after you've read the comics, you might really get a kick out of it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting point because I do see, like, just to bridge over into movies a little bit, like I think 300 has always been one of my favorite comic book adaptations. I think that
Yeah.
the thing about Frank Miller's stuff in that story that was special is like the composition, is the look, is the feel, and to see it brought into real life was
Yeah, see it
ultimately
blown
what
up
was
like
really
that.
engaging about it.
Yeah.
Just because I don't feel like the characters or the story could really hold up in.
Certainly
I
not.
don't really think, and definitely not Zack Snyder being the person to adapt it would have very much to say. I think about that. That would be interesting to us. But I really like 300. I think 300's worthwhile, and I think it also holds up to rewatching just because it's so beautiful. And But I think that especially in a serialized format where you have much more room to work, and character and narrative are so much, maybe you could say, more important, because they have to stand up in the long term, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. Like, having a little bit more freedom to move around, having the ability to make sure that the audience can't see exactly where you're going is kind of imperative in order to be successful. I do want to say that I think that there are series that really just shoot themselves in the foot where they think they know better than the original. Like, they kind of, they don't understand what it was about the original content that made it special. I think Legends of Tomorrow from DC, which is just not a very good show in my opinion, is a perfect example of a network thinking that they have this thing going on, which is sort of like goofy superhero stuff, and they're just going to make it into a show, you know, and they're just going to pull characters. And I think even to a certain extent, the original Arrow TV show has fallen into that trap where it's like, we know better. And they're no longer like drawing inspiration from the content that people loved, you know. And it, like, I don't know too many, I don't think the culture around the CW shows is the culture of we love Green Arrow, so we love Arrow type of a thing, right? Like, the same way that it is around like Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Preacher and even The Walking Dead, right? Like, there's not that engagement from the fan base that they wanted to take advantage of in the first place.
Yeah, I feel like it's
You know
more
what I'm
people
saying?
who enjoyed like CW and Supernatural previously, and this happens to hit the same vibes.
Which might be the right marketing decision. I don't know. Maybe they make more money that way. Who can say? But for me, that's not really what I'm interested in, right?
Yeah,
So,
I see what you're saying.
yeah, I don't know. Okay, so we, as we said previously, we want to, I think, leave the TV stuff, the comic to TV stuff, for maybe the next episode. Maybe next week we'll tackle that and sort of get into that filmography.
You mean the movie stuff?
Yeah, the movie stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about the small screen, comics to the small screen, Will? Anything else? Any capstone thoughts?
I can't think of anything particular. I did want to mention though, like, and this kind of encapsulates what I wanted to talk about with movies too. Is that when you were talking about 300, it reminded me of Watchmen, which was also, you know, a Zack Snyder film, and like, I do think that movies have a potential to recreate things shot for shot and have it be successful in a way that TV shows don't. I totally agree with what you're saying, like that if you're going to do a TV show and it's going to last for 6 or 7 seasons, it does need to hold up in a way that 2.5 hours doesn't. If that makes sense. Like, just sitting down to watch, you know, Watchmen, like, I actually like Watchmen a lot, the movie. I mean, and even though like it is literally panel for panel recreated on screen, like, it's kind of neat to see that. I don't think it's like, I wouldn't say it's an amazing film or anything, but it's one of those things where it is just kind of like a neat little experiment in like recreating art or whatever. But for me, like, I am for TV specifically, I'm more interested in seeing it take its own directions, because if you need to last for 6 seasons of, you know, 20 episodes or whatever, and you're going to make it that long, I want to see things that are different and interesting. And that's kind of what, like, I think why The Last Man is probably like the most interesting thing to me in terms of like upcoming TV shows, because I really like that series a lot. And it's a series that, like, from the get-go, I think the comic book series, that is, from the get-go, I think people were saying like, holy crap, this needs a TV adaptation. Like, this really, you know, screams like, and even Brian K. Vaughan was like the showrunner on oh god, what was he the showrunner on? He was the showrunner on like The Dome. I think that TV show, The Dome. Like,
was
and
he
he's
the
been
showrunner on The Dome?
Yeah, I think he was. And you know, he's been intimately involved in television creation before, and like, people were kind of really clamoring for why The Last Man to be that, because it really, you know, in the way it tells stories and leaves cliffhangers and the way, you know, it is told, it really does feel like a serialized TV show. And I guess that's kind of what I'm, Under the Dome, there you go. Not, I don't think, known as the best series in the world, but he was the showrunner.
No, definitely not. He wrote a little bit of Lost, apparently.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and I guess like that's my thing is that if Why the Last Man comes to TV, like, and I could see it being a good TV series, I would rather see it like I don't know. It's tough, like because you sort of part of me would sort of say I want to see them just pick up the needle and put it down somewhere else, because it's such an interesting idea and such an interesting world that they're all living in, like post men kind of thing, that you could like pick up, your magnifying glass and put it down on, like, I don't know, Russia or whatever, and you could have an interesting story there just in that world. Or you could go and just focus, the magnifying glass on the same characters that the comic book focused on. It's like, I don't know. I'm of two minds. I don't really have an answer for that kind of thing where it's like, because that's kind of reminds me of like The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead, where The Walking Dead kind of
Yeah.
tries to follow those characters, and Fear the Walking Dead is like, well, let's just pick up our lens and plop it down somewhere else and see what those stories are going on. So like, I can see value in both of them, and I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, if you announce a Why the Last Man TV series, but it's not focused on Yorick and the same like exact struggles, I think you would lose a lot of people. So I don't know, it's tough. Like, part of me wants to see new endeavors done by TV and not just adapting, panel for panel. But I also understand that like something like Preacher kind of walks the line really well, where it's like you can capture those fans, but without like making it the exact same thing, like force fed to them again. I don't know. Is that somewhat of an interesting wrap up? I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think we were saying basically the same thing because I was actually thinking about Why the Last Man as I was making that point. Like, well, I don't know, people really love Why the Last Man if they
Yeah.
didn't like I couldn't see them, but people were saying the same thing about Preacher in a lot of ways. Like
Yeah.
people love Preacher and it's doing just fine because they understand what it is about the show that makes it great, right?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to like the quality of the
Of the actual
the team
thing
behind.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay. Well, I'm comfortable ending the discussion there. We did discuss maybe giving some suggestions for things we think people might like, or at least our favorite things. Do you have any TV shows, comic TV shows that you like super love and wish people watched and could talk about more?
I'm trying to think. Most of the ones that I have are probably movies. I'm trying to think of. I mean, I would say like go back and watch. I'm sure you're gonna say this as well, but the Batman Beyond and Batman series and that stuff from the '90s.
Yeah.
Um, I really do
Good
like that
stuff.
stuff. It is good stuff. I'm trying to think of like, because for the most part, I am not as up and up on my television. Probably the one that I've seen the most of is The Walking Dead, and I can't like in good consciousness really recommend that. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's like good TV. I think it's kind of like
Yeah.
middle of the road, kind of like trashy emotion pulling TV. So I don't know. What is yours? Because I think you are probably more well equipped to
Well, thank
recommend
you.
than I
I
am.
would definitely. One thing that we didn't discuss was a show on Sci-Fi called Dark Matter. It's
Okay.
from the
Yeah, I don't know anything about
showrunners of. Yeah, it's from the showrunners of. Oh man, I'm blanking on the name. Stargate SG1, which is a show that I grew up with. Man, I watch basically every
Yeah,
episode of that
one of
show.
my
It's
friends
very,
like really loved that back in the day.
yeah, it's very nostalgic for me. Like if it was on, I was watching it, and I must have watched hundreds of hours of that TV show. So the show feels like home. It's maybe not the cleanest storytelling or like the most thought provoking storytelling, but it's definitely some of the funnest, and I really like it. So if you are into that style of TV show, then Dark Matter is definitely for you. It has a lot of the same vibes. It's a little bit more modern, a little bit updated, but still a lot of fun. And basically the thing about those shows is that they have like really sort of fun casts who have good chemistry, and the dialogue is fun, and they're put in interesting enough situations that it's kind of a light, fun adventure story. I guess I should pitch it. Dark Matter is about a crew. There's 6 crew members who all wake up from stasis, and they've all lost their memories. They don't remember who they are. So they name each other in the order that they woke up, 1 through 6. Or is it 5? I think it might be 6. I can't remember. Whatever. There's 5 or 6
You
of
could
them.
tell me any number
And
and I would believe it.
So basically, the show is they're trying to figure out who they are. Slowly, they figure out who they are over the course of the season. They all end up being not maybe the most reputable people in the world, and they're kind of dealing with things from the time that they can't remember who they are up until now. And there's like a bunch of problems that they have to, they basically have to get shit done. And it's a fun cast, and it's a fun premise, and a pretty fun execution. The first season is pretty short. I think it's around 12 episodes. Not very much time you have to spend with them, and the show is built in the same way that we found that a lot of these first seasons are very tight and have a point of view, because they're exploring the world and they're exploring these characters in sort of an effective way. I feel like that at least the first season of Dark Matter really kind of shines in that respect, where you can tell they're going somewhere with it. The second season has just come out. I haven't watched it yet. I will when it's done. I think I'm going to binge it. I've become that person. But
that's how I like
to do it
too.
The first season was a lot of fun, and I would recommend it if you kind of need something light and enjoyable. I would also say that, again, with Batman Beyond and the original Batman show, you need to check out Justice League, and especially
I have those on my watch list.
Justice League Unlimited is so good. So good. So much fun, really high quality production, really solid storytelling, just amazing stuff, really good stuff. So those would be my recommendations.
Yeah. Also, I would say, I'm sure we've talked about it a lot, in this episode and in other ones, but the first season of Daredevil, I think, like, regardless of whether you want
magic,
it's just so good. Yeah. Regardless of whether you have any interest in, like, you don't need to watch Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and the Defenders or season 2, like, and it doesn't really matter if you don't like Daredevil that much either. Like, I just think that season 1 of Daredevil is one of the most successful kind of like superhero properties that I've seen, in terms of like just bringing everything about it is so tight and good. So I would recommend, like, if you're on the fence about that, and if superhero stuff like generally kind of turns you off, I would be surprised that you're listening to this podcast. But if for some reason, like, it's not super your thing, and even if you have no interest in anything else in the Netflix universe, like, just give season 1 a watch, because it's so strong. It's just so well composed and done and filmed and acted, and, like, even if they end up crapping out like seasons 4 through 10 and Defenders is shit, like, I don't know. I have no idea. At least we'll always have Daredevil season 1
away from us.
They can't take season 1 away from us, because, like,
it away.
Yeah, it really is very good.
Yep. Would agree. All right. I think that's good for the main section of the podcast. We're going to take a quick break, guys, and we'll be right back with what we have been reading, watching, and listening to. Go.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back from that lovely musical interlude, still provided by our lovely friend Brent Krzyzanowski. We haven't seen him on the show in a while, hope to have him back soon, but he is the magical fingers behind all of the lovely sounds that you hear in our breaks and intros and outros and stuff. So we're very, very thankful to him for letting us use his amazing music. Check him out online. He's a cool cat. Anyways, as of last week, we skipped Amani's favorite part, the consuming. I don't know why I paused right there. But last week we had 3 people on the show, so it got a little much to talk about everything, and there were a bunch of cool trailers, so we decided to jump on that. But this week, we are back with a vengeance to talk about all the things that we have been reading, watching, listening to. So Amani's going to start off with whatever she has been consuming in the 2 weeks since we last talked to her.
Thanks, Will. What a kind introduction. I feel like my list is going to be mostly watching and listening, because
go for it.
It's just been kind of a couple of weeks. So the first 2 things I wanted to mention is, and I know you hate this term, but one of my guilty pleasures is like football movies and TV shows. For whatever reason.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just really like them.
We're talking
I don't know what it is.
American football, or are we talking soccer?
American football. So like Friday Night Lights, love it. Remember the Titans,
I've heard that's a good
love
show.
It. Don't watch. Yeah, it's a good show, especially the first season. I don't watch any actual football.
Interesting.
But nevertheless, I have a deep love for it. And 2 interesting documentary series came out recently. One's called All or Nothing. It's an Amazon original, and it basically follows a full season of a Major League Football team, the Arizona Cardinals, and you just go through with them through the series. And then the other one is called Last Chance U. It just premiered on Netflix. It is, again, a documentary series about a small university, and I forget where it is, but it's somewhere in the South, that is famous for taking on football players who have had a bad history, who maybe have gotten kicked out of bigger name schools for drug problems or maybe fighting or violence or whatever, and it and also like takes on students who come from poorer backgrounds, a lot of young black men who are being kind of thrust into the football system. I don't know if you know anything about how Major League Football works, but a lot
I
of
do a
black
little
youth
bit. I
are
mean,
being
coming
sort
from
of
the
cycled
South, it
through.
is somewhat necessary to know a little bit about football.
Yeah. So you're familiar with both series are very well made. Both are kind of depressing, but also really interesting. I would say All or Nothing is much more upbeat. It's still kind of sad, but much more upbeat. Very tightly made. It does things with documentary filmmaking that I haven't quite seen before. There's a lot of, I wonder how they get the sound, I think was my biggest question, because it'll be people talking like way across the football field, and they're getting what they're saying clear as day. Are they wired? Do they have like some?
I know a lot of
like,
football
focus in?
players are wired.
Yeah,
like the players
'cause
themselves have like microphones and stuff to talk to the coaches.
they must, because the sound is so crystal clear. Anyway,
Yeah.
so from a filmmaking perspective, they're both very interesting because I think they're both different. I think Last Chance U, the filmmakers were a little bit more artistic. They were trying to say something about society, and they had a little bit more fun with the cinematography. And then All or Nothing is much tighter and is much more straightforward and still really great, full of about really, really compelling, interesting people. I don't know. I'm into it. I like documentaries that are about things that I don't really deal with in my real life, just because I think that's the whole point of documentaries. And these were both solid and a lot of fun. I don't know if they're for everybody, but I definitely enjoyed them. I thought they were good. All or Nothing, I think I enjoyed a little bit more than Last Chance U, just because Last Chance U was so goddamn depressing and sad. But anyway, cool to check out if that sort of thing floats your boat.
That's cool.
I went to see a couple of things in the theaters. I saw
Ooh.
Finding Dory with my father, which was perfectly acceptable. Fine. It was fine. I don't really have very much to say about it, which tells you all you need
Put
to know.
that quote on the Blu-ray. Perfectly acceptable. Get a cat, get a horse. It was fine.
Yeah.
Watchable.
I wouldn't be mad at anybody who said they liked that movie a lot. It had a lot of things about it that were charming and fun. It did feel like a sequel. I think maybe Dory isn't the kind of a character who can stand up to a full, hour and a half, 2 hours being solely about her. It kind of the whole memory loss thing kind of gets old, and it was
is Nemo and his dad in there at all? Are they in there?
Oh
at all?
yeah.
Yeah.
They're Dory's family. Will, what are you talking about?
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Jesus, what's wrong with you? Basically, if you like Finding Nemo, definitely go see Finding Dory. It's a good time. I wouldn't have super high expectations of it, because it does sort of feel. I think this is the kind of film where you really see the critics from the people who just go to have a good time. Do you know what I mean? I think this is going to be a really strict divide. I think people who are just going to a movie to have a good time are going to love it, and people who sort of pick apart filmmaking are going to be like, well, it wasn't that great, like it wasn't
Well, I think
as original as the first one.
Pixar built that kind of like big, huge, really fervent, I don't know what the word is, like really, really rabid fan following, and like a huge, big, like critical acclaim. And I think they've like honestly have spent the last kind of 5 years like tearing that down. Like, and I don't mean that like to say that their movies are bad anymore, but like, when you go to like Cars and like Planes and Finding Dory and what was the like, I don't know, it just feels like what they had at one point is kind of like falling away a little bit. And like the movies are still fun to see.
The sad thing about that for me is like if Finding Dory had come out of DreamWorks, we would have all been like, "Oh my God, DreamWorks did it! They made like the best movie they've ever made." Because it is. It's cohesive. It's coherent. It's really solid filmmaking. It's beautiful. The voice acting is great. The script is funny and engaging. But Pixar is known for that magical spark, that it factor,
it's hard to
like
recapture that every time.
fresh. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that Finding Dory landed that for me, but I think for a lot of people it was a good time.
Uh-huh.
Definitely worth going to see for the visuals alone. Gorgeous, gorgeous movie. Um, I went and saw Star Trek Beyond with my
Oh,
mom.
nice. I want to see that.
Going to see movies with them. Yeah, you're gonna enjoy it. I think it's a good time.
Yeah.
Again, kind of is a little bit bloated, a little bit too big for its own good, a little bit too actiony for its own good, but it, unlike the second one, I really feel like this one really takes advantage of the cast that they have,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of separates out the crew, so you're kind of forced to go to different people in different places and kind of let them shine a little bit, which I think really worked in its favor. Um, Perfectly enjoyable blockbuster movie. A good time for all, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I went and saw Nerve with Emma Watson
Oh, yeah.
and Dave Franco. Is that his name? Dave?
Yep. It is. Yep.
Not Emma Watson, Emma Robertson. Oh my god, how embarrassing. Emma Robertson and Dave Franco in a teen thriller about a girl who is shy and doesn't take chances, and she decides to play this game called Nerve, where basically people dare her to do crazy things for money. Dangerous things,
So the
illegal things,
actual
all
like
kinds of stuff.
that movie itself doesn't look amazing, but like the concept I think is pretty cool. Like I could see like a short
Yeah.
sci-fi story or like a short film or something like that that's like pretty neat.
Yeah. I think this movie makes some really big missteps with the concept. I think I actually went and saw it with Ethan, our guest of last week,
Oh, yeah,
and we
yeah.
both said the same thing. What you just said was the concept is really cool and really fun, and the execution of it was leaves a lot to be desired. The script itself felt like it was written by a teenage girl, in that people said exactly what they were thinking. There's literally a point in the movie where the friend is explaining to the main character what Nerve is, and she turns to him and she says, "Man, how do you know so much about Nerve?" And it was like, well, main character, your friend is a plot device whose job it is to provide exposition for the audience. That's why he knows.
Yeah,
And he
it's
was
pretty
like,
weak
well, I
storytelling.
just am on the internet. Yeah, it was just full of things like that where
Yeah.
the mom's a nurse and she would be nursing and she would be like, "Okay, friend, you feel better now. You're gonna be on your feet in no time at all," and the patient would be like, "Thanks, doc, like you're the best." Like classic, like really, really simplistic dialogue that ended up just making the whole thing almost unwatchable. um
It sounds a little bit like have
I
you seen the Michael Douglas movie The Game?
I've heard about it.
That's a good one. It kind of reminds me a
on
little
Netflix?
bit of that. I don't know if it is or not, but that's a David Fincher movie actually. It's David Fincher directed from like maybe late '90s, I think, and it's
Oh,
kind of
wow.
like that. It's like this guy who gets signed up for this like non-specific like game, like real life game thing by his brother as kind of like a gift, and then it kind of like all spirals out of control, and it's like who's playing the game and who's not, and where it kind of reminded me of
Yeah.
that. I got vibes of it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it, but that kind of sounds
That's a really
similar.
good
And I
movie,
think
though.
also like I'm definitely gonna check it out. I have the trailer. Anything David Fincher, right? You gotta check it
Yeah,
out.
it's good.
Basically, I think that also the premise of it kind of falls apart. I think they could have easily fixed it if it takes place modern day, but if they had made it 20 or 30 years in the future, where we would all believe that technology has taken enough of a step that, hundreds of thousands of teenagers could be playing this hugely dangerous game and nobody would notice or do
Pokemon
anything
Go,
about
bro.
it.
Pokemon Go. It's happening right now.
Yeah, but the whole thing about Nerve is that it's like a secret and like none of the authorities know about it, and it's like bullshit. Like if kids were like stealing things from cops and jumping off of things and doing dangerous shit, like people, especially at this like the I'm blanking on this word, but at the production level that you're saying it's happening, people would notice, right? Like this is the internet. There's no secrets on the internet. And there was just like some implausibility where everybody was connected always, and they're teenagers. They don't have good cell service. Bullshit. They can just go wherever. Like it was just a little bit too unbelievable. And then at the very end, Emma Roberts gives this very inspirational speech about,
I love those.
If somebody dies, then it is your fault, even though it is only through the internet. You need to be engaged with real life, even though nobody had talked about the morality of this from the beginning. Like there was the movie had been about her and her boyfriend, period. Like It was just really frustrating, really terrible filmmaking.
That's too bad.
The last thing that I wanted to mention was I've been watching a little bit of David Cross, a little bit of his stand up, a little bit of Bigger and Blacker. I finished Bigger and Blacker, and then oh man, The Pride is Back from 1999. Some of the older HBO specials that he did, and they're really good. He's a funny guy. Very, very divisive. I can see why he will not be for everybody. He has a lot of things to say about religion. Will, I think you will especially enjoy him.
I don't think I've ever seen his stand up. I've seen him do like sketch stuff with Mr. Show, and I've seen him on Arrested Development, obviously, but I don't think I've ever seen his stand up.
And I only watched a little bit of Mr. Show, and I only watched a little bit of Arrested Development, and I had never really gotten into it, but his stand up is really good. The guy's funny as hell, and
there's a
really
new
good
series
at
with him and
an hour of That's why
on
that's why I
Netflix.
looked it up. It's called Make America Great Again. It's going to come out in the next week or so, I think. So
Oh
I'm
no,
really
I was talking about
jazzed for
something
that
different
because
actually.
his old stand up is good. Oh, you were?
Yeah,
What were you talking about?
there's a sketch show. It's like with Dave and Robert or so. It's the guys. It's him and the guy who was in Mr. Show. What's his name? Bob. The guy who plays Saul in Breaking Bad. It's the two of them. They have like a
Okay.
Netflix sketch show as well. But I didn't know. No, what's the Make America Great again? Is that a new one?
It's another stand up It's another stand up.
Oh, okay.
About an hour
Okay,
and a half.
gotcha.
It's produced by Netflix. He's been touring with it, so it's going to be out on Netflix
Nice.
soon, very, very soon, which is great because it's going to be timely. I think he's going to have a lot to say about Mr. Donald Trump, which is I'm all up for. I think you especially will. I really encourage you to look up Bigger and Blacker, just on YouTube even. I think you can find it. It's really good. I think you'd really enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
do
I've got
like
going
him.
on. What about you? What about you? What have you been up to?
I've been up to a little bit. So this is kind of like it's just a strange story, but I figured I would tell it here anyway. So I decided to sell my entire record collection, which was
Whoa.
yeah, I know, a bit of, a little bit sad, but
Why?
I found I wasn't listening to them that much, and I knew I could get like a decent amount of money out of them, and just my collection goals have changed. In the last like 2 or 3 years, I've shifted into collecting obviously comic books so much more. So I just didn't really feel like I was needing or using them that much. But this
That's
is just
a
a funny
big deal for you.
I know it was a lot. It was about 400 records. Sold them to a guy or to a what's it called? A record store that was pretty close by. But it was funny, on that day I sold them, and I had cashed the check, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go look at go to some used bookstores, see if there's anything good out there. And I found the Joss Whedon, John Cassaday Astonishing X-Men omnibus for $32 at a used
I hate
bookstore,
you.
which is
I
like
hate you
usually a
so
$150 book. I know, it was
Oh my
amazing.
God. I
It was just like-
really have a lot of hate for you in my
It
heart
was just
right
such like a
now.
funny like universe delivers moment where I was just like, oh, I sort of sold these, and I was like, oh man, like that's a bit of a bummer. Like, well, let's see if there's anything else out there. And I just walked up and was like, looked down and was like, oh my god. So
Was it in good condition? Is it in good condition?
it's in pretty good condition. The dust jacket's a little beat, but the book itself is nice. It's it's not bad. It's definitely not probably like the $160 sealed copy that might go online, but it's probably like $100 book or something like that. But
Nice.
anyway, the reason why that is interesting to me was because I started reading Uncanny X-Force. Have you do you know anything about that?
Yeah, isn't it Rick Remender?
Yeah, it is Rick Remender's stuff.
I
And
haven't read it because I don't
well,
have it.
I started. It's like a very expensive omnibus.
Yeah, it is.
But there's a couple collections, complete collections, I think, of it. But so I started reading that, and I was kind of like, I was enjoying it, but there were pieces of it that I was like, man, I don't really understand what's going on here. So I sort of shelved that, and
Yeah, doesn't it come right
getting-
after Uncanny X-Men?
well, so that's what's kind of confusing about it. Like, I guess New X-Men is the Grant Morrison one, and then it goes into Astonishing
Yeah.
X-Men, which is the Joss Whedon one, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Uncanny X-Force comes like somewhere either in like the middle slash end of Astonishing X-Men. Either way,
Oh,
I
really?
was happy that I found the omnibus because I can now kind of like go back and read like modern X-Men in a more concise way. So I that was one of the things that I read. I read a little bit of it. From what I read, I could tell that it's not going to be my thing exactly. Uncanny X Force. I think it's more for people who are into kind of like action and like Deadpool is in the team, and he kind of has his like goofiness stuff. And I thought the Deadpool was pretty good and like the way that Remender wrote him, but it doesn't seem to be like my exact cup of tea. But that was one thing I was
Yeah.
reading was Uncanny X Force, and then that just reminded me of this whole thing. So probably in the upcoming weeks, you'll hear me talk a little bit more about modern X-Men stuff as I eventually make my way into it.
I can't believe you
I'm
found it for $30.
I know 32.50.
You're the
That's what it was.
worst.
No
You're the
tax because it's in
worst.
Delaware. So just $32 right off. Yep. It was so funny because there was a guy standing in front of it. There's a guy like looking at the table. Is this older guy, and he was kind of looking at it, and I walked up to the table and was just like, swoop, like picked it up immediately and was like, holy shit, because I knew exactly what it was and how much it's worth.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like, you weren't looking at this, right? And he's like, no, I'm into older Avengers stuff. And then he kind of like talked about Avengers for a while, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, glad that I didn't have to fight you for this, because like, you do not know what you
I
just
would
passed
have.
up. I know. I am today. I promise I am going to finish the Colossal Conan omnibus. I'm going to finish it. It's been probably 2 months of me talking about reading it. So I am I have been reading a lot of it recently. I'm just about at the end. It's interesting. It gets a little watered down and kind of weird because different writers and artists start coming in, and I do think it loses a little bit of something. But there was a 3 or 4 issue arc actually where Mike Mignola was writing the Hellboy
Oh,
guy.
really?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was like really good. It's just that was my favorite piece of this omnibus so far. Because Kurt Busiek is the writer for most of it, and his stuff is pretty good. I like it's kind of like classic sword and sorcery, but Mike Mignola's like his 4 issue arc was like awesome. It was really much more about kind of the in the world of Conan, there's like dark gods and kind of like evil black magics and stuff, and it was more about like ancient curses and dark gods and stuff, and kind of had that like Mike Mignola horror fantasy twist to it, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
Hellboy is. So yeah, I have been enjoying it. Right now, I'm at the kind of the last probably like five, I don't know, like 10 issues or so of it, like issues 40 to like 50, and I think they are okay. It just kind of starts switching artists and writers so much that it just doesn't really feel the same. But enjoying finally finishing that up. And I'm trying to think. I've been watching a TV show called Fresh Meat. Have you ever watched that?
No.
No. It's a
Looking it up.
British comedy. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. But it's one that I like watched a while ago, like when it was first coming out, and then I kind of fell off of it. And now that it's finished, I'm going back and watching it. It's basically like, so there's a TV show called Peep Show that's one of my absolute
Oh, I've
favorite
seen
comedies
this.
of all time. I
Yeah, I've seen
love Peep
Fresh
Show.
Meat.
You've seen Fresh Meat? Do you remember
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah.
Did you like it or not?
I didn't really like it.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. It's not like I said. I think it's good. It's not great. Like for me, some of the characters like happen to hit, and I like them. And there's like a few cameos and stuff that I enjoy. But basically, it's like a 6 freshmen at a university in England in Manchester who all are living together in like an off-campus house, and just like the shenanigans they get up to. And I mean, basically they're just like bad people. Like they're just shitty people, and they just like
Mm-hmm.
do shitty things, but it's funny. I don't know. I mean, I enjoy it. If you like British comedy, this TV show is created by the same two guys who created Peep Show. And I don't think it's anywhere even remotely near the quality of Peep Show. But if you're looking for some kind of like British comedy with like kind of like an edgier, younger thing going on, because like it's all kind of college students and they're all about like drinking and trying to like sleep around and do drugs and stuff. I am enjoying it just sort of like for a comfort watch. Like I like putting it on and just kind of watching it, but I don't think it's like amazingly good. I would recommend it, but not enthusiastically. Um, and then
Cool.
and then finally, I just finished Mass Effect 2, which I had been working on for
Congratulations.
quite some time. Yep, I think it was like ultimately like 22 hours or something like that into it. And so I just finished Mass Effect 2, and I started Mass Effect 3 last night. So now I'm going to finish my Mass Effect playthrough. Really interesting to go back and do it all in one chunk, kind of in hindsight, and see how different all the games are. Because when I played them the first time, it was with a space of a couple years between all of them. So I'm glad I'm going back and doing it. It's interesting to see and just kind of understanding like how they were constructed and what each game did well and didn't do well. And I think 2 is still like really, really strong and amazing. I'm not sure if I'm gonna like 3 as much, if it's gonna hold up. But yeah, if you are interested in space opera epic stuff, like there's not many games that are more grand in their scope and scale than this. I'd be interested to see if anybody like leaves in the comments or anything like that. If you've played Mass Effect, which one is your favorite and why you like them? Because they are very different beasts each game, and with the fourth one coming out sometime next year, I think it's gonna be interesting to see like which pieces of each game they kind of take to make the next experience. Because there's a very wide variety of different types of experiences that have been, just in these 3 games. So it's interesting looking forward just to see what the series has done in the past. Yeah, I think that's about it though. Can't think of anything else that's
Cool.
incredibly exciting.
Sorry.
Oh yeah,
I'm getting to the place.
I'm
where I can
I'm the
do
one
that.
that does the ending.
Yep.
I remember
Why
that.
don't you thank the nice people?
I will thank the nice people. Thank you, nice people. Thank you guys so much for listening to our show. All of the different watches and listens that we've gotten through SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube, and any of the comments and stuff. We super appreciate it. So thank you so much. We appreciate your continued patronage.
Yeah, we sure do. We hope you find yourself ready to start a discussion and head over to the Facebook page for Get a Cat, Get a Horse. We love to hear from you guys. Questions, comments, whatever you guys think about the current or previous episodes, we want to hear from you and your beautiful, beautiful faces. You can find this show on iTunes, SoundCloud, and most other podcasting platforms, as well as on Will's YouTube channel, Nerd How. If you want to see what we look like,
That is your YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is
or
Nerd
how many
Ventures.
times. Oh yeah, Nerd Ventures. I'm sorry, I just need all the attention. If you want to see how many times Will picks his nose during the podcast, please go over and
Did you count
away.
last time? How many was it?
I didn't count. I can't watch myself. It's weird to
Interesting.
be able to see my face. Like, I like listening to the podcast. That's my preferred method of consuming it.
Well, there you go.
Anyway,
So you
somebody
guys should
count and
watch
put
it to
on the
make up
Facebook
for
page.
Amani not watching it.
Yeah, somebody needs to do it for me.
Yeah, and while you guys are watching, listening, or wherever, if you find the inspiration to leave any ratings, reviews, or to share this podcast with your friends, we would be eternally grateful. We really appreciate any way that you can get us in front of more people's faces, and helping us with ratings or reviews, likes, comments, and shares is extremely awesome. Just get it out there in the world, and hopefully more people can get on board the nerd train.
Yeah. Next week on Get a Cat, Get a Horse, we are going to be talking about comic book adaptations to the big screen. Will's going to be leading this discussion. I'm sure it's going to be full of existential crises and very interesting and ultimately useless thoughts on film.
Maybe. I don't know about the interesting part, but we'll
But
see.
in a good way.
In a good
In a
way.
good way.
You can find me at Nerd Ventures, which is the YouTube channel that I operate, where the podcast is also hosted. If you only listen to it auditorially, please feel free to check out the video there. You can also find me on Facebook, SoundCloud, or no, sorry, Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter at The Nerd Venturer, where I am free to answer questions from wherever source you might send them to me from. And where can we find you, Manny?
You can find me under the number NerdHow, NERDHOW, on YouTube, Tumblr, and Twitter. All right, guys. Get a cat.
Get a horse.